Hi, everybody. This is Josh Becerra from Augurian. I have the pleasure to be talking with Dan Wallace today. Dan and I have known each other for a very long time, probably over 10 years. I think we met at Coco co-working space in downtown Minneapolis. We were kind of sharing some office space. So that was a long time ago, Dan.
It was, Josh, but what good memories.
Yeah, that was a great space. So Dan has been in marketing for over 20 years, written a book called The Physics of Brand, and now you have a faculty position at the University of Wisconsin LaCrosse, and also doing some advising with executives of smaller companies. Is that right?
Yep, that's right, Josh.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I've always just loved talking with you. You're a great kind of marketing brand mind, but I'm really curious about like this like newer part of your life, which is teaching at the university. So how's that been? Like, have you been enjoying the classroom, and what's it like to be with all those young folks?
So I've enjoyed it more than I could imagine. Really, it's fun. I mean, one of the things you forget about that 20-year-olds don't have much knowledge or experience.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to get their minds going. This generation, I'm really impressed with. You know, they're very good kids. It's been fun, and it also is helping me learn deeper. You know, they say the best way to learn is to teach, and I really do see that, developing new skills. And it's also been fun to be in LaCrosse and to, experience a small town. I've never lived in a small town before.
Yeah. Well, that's very cool. And I'm sure they just love having you. I can only imagine, like, I remember some of my marketing classes in college, and I think people who were teaching them were pretty theoretical. You know, they hadn't actually been out there and doing it for as long as you have, and having written the book and everything. So I'm sure those kids must love being able to pick your brain and ask you questions about your previous experiences. So that's really cool.
Yeah, you're right. They love the stories, and it's fun to kind of put them in context and integrate them with the theory.
Yeah. Right on. So I mentioned the book, The Physics of Brand. I'm just interested in like what drove you to write a book. I know that you've said to me before, it's like a lot of work. So tell us a little bit about like why you thought it was important to write this book and how it was even to write it. I can't imagine it was easy.
It was, it was quite a process. I mean, the book really started in 2002.
Okay.
I called up Aaron Keller, who is the principal at Capsule, and I come originally from the advertising business. Design was really becoming more important at that point in time. Wanted to chat with him about that. We were both fans of Lou Carbone and Joe Pine. The concept of experience as being key to marketing came out of Minneapolis through Joe Pine and Lou Carbone. So we had a good conversation about that. And somewhere past the second beer, we came up with this concept that a brand is the sum of all the experiences with people across time and space.
Wow.
And we thought that was far out at the time. The next day we thought, well, was our beer speaking, or was it really a good idea?
Right.
And so, we kept picking at it over a number of years. Then Aaron was at an accountants conference and ran into Renee Marino, who testifies in court on brand value.
Okay.
And he told this story to Renee and said, well, what do you think of this idea? And she says, I think it's a great idea. I'd work with you guys on something with this. So during the recession of 2008, we worked on a white paper. And then we all got busy with our businesses as the economy picked up. And around 2014, we're like, well, why don't we send this off to some publishers? See what can happen. So we sent it out to a number of publishers, and our number one choice, which is now Simon & Schuster, picked it up. It's in 3 different languages.
Wow.
Second printing. It's been great, and the process of writing with Aaron and Renee was really exciting and fun. The thing I feel best about is apparently when people co-author books, half the time they'll never talk to each other again, and we're all friends. So
that's cool.
It was a great experience.
You know, part of my history is I've got two business partners who are my childhood friends, and people always say never to do that either. And it seems to work out for us. So it is nice when you can have those experiences and come out on the other side still whole.
It's true, you know, and there's always exceptions to the rule, right? So
yeah. So what do you what's your like biggest learning from the book, or like what have people really, what conceptually have people latched onto? You know, it's got lots of chapters. So what are you talking most about with people about the book these days?
You know, I'm really not talking about it too much anymore.
Okay.
The book is too advanced for the students I have, and really the book is primarily focused on, you know, serving global CMOs and people who are in the field of experience, customer experience.
Yep.
So it's a pretty narrow group of people who, you know, are the prime book. Many other people bought it, but those people seem to have liked it the best, and primarily because the book creates a framework to look at how customer experience works. Essentially, Renee helped Aaron and I figure out what our beer conversation meant, and
cool.
So
that's awesome. So I know that you got another book in the works. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the concept, at least what you're working on?
Yeah, this one's been had a long fuse as well. The concept's pretty easy. Executing it is a challenge, but it's coming along. The concept is to go and look at all the different aspects of work, and currently I have 36 different aspects. One of the really hard parts is to figure out the right taxonomy for work.
Sure.
There is not one, you know, so I'm still working on that. And then to reach out in each one of those categories, things like finance, marketing, negotiation, and find 3 thought leaders who are the best in that area, and then ask them to come up with the most essential questions in those areas. So it's going to be a reference book that people at work will use, particularly leaders and managers, but really anybody, to understand what are the most essential questions you need to ask in the most important areas of work. So that's the concept. And I have an intern working with me on researching to find all these people this summer, and it should be out the fall of 2021.
Well, that's very cool. I mean, nobody can have domain knowledge over all those areas, right? And it's great to be able to rely on folks who have that domain knowledge and expertise to at least get you, you know, asking the right questions, which sometimes is half the battle. So I think you're really onto something there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, the world's so complex these days, and you know, I think that, you know, if you're talking with somebody in an area that you don't know about, the best way to look smart is to ask good questions.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's also the best way to learn. So.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So the world is kind of crazy, you said. We're kind of living in a pretty unprecedented context, of course, with the pandemic, COVID going on, and here in Minneapolis, the murder of George Floyd, the ensuing protests, even riots, Black Lives Matter movement kind of expanding globally. Like it's a pretty new world. I'd be curious to just hear your thoughts on what marketers and brand stewards should be paying attention to, or what they need to be thinking about a little bit in these unprecedented times.
Well, surely we all need to be on our toes and adaptable.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much change going on that I think it's unpredictable, you know, to know exactly where things are going to go.
Right.
I've been concerned for a long time about the economic divide in America. That's been a steady problem. And also, one of the finance people that I follow has said that if you go back to 2008 and if you take away the increase in the debt, our economy wouldn't have grown. So, there's some who believe that essentially, our economy is not operating in an authentic way.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of deep problems. Obviously that the murder of George Floyd was horrific. And, anybody who looks at history will know that African Americans and Native Americans in particular, have not had a good experience in the United States. And, those are continuing issues. And, we're coming back to those again.
Yeah.
So
you're seeing brands and companies kind of responding to this in a number of different ways. Is your opinion that there's that people should be there should be responses from companies, that companies should start taking positions? Do you have any thoughts from that perspective? How do companies and marketing teams need to be thinking about some of these issues?
Well, I think it depends on the company and what they do and the markets they serve. To some extent, certainly they need to be aware of these issues.
Yeah.
In terms of COVID, many companies, they have to change the way they operate.
Sure.
Because of it. And the companies that are delivering more, for some, it's interesting. I talk with a lot of people, and for some, particularly people in your space in technology, they're seeing growth.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of, taking public stands on politics and social issues, it's always a bit of a challenging situation for companies. If it really is authentic to the company, I think it can make sense for them to do it. But if it's not, I think it's better to spend your time learning how to be more aware of these issues in the company and try doing what you can to solve them, rather than, for example, running ads, supporting things you don't know much about.
Right. Yeah. That's never a good practice. So let's shift gears a little bit. You mentioned that the book, The Physics of Brands, is a book that a lot of CMOs could have a lot of use of. I was just reading a Harvard Business Review article about how the role of CMO is just one of the hardest roles, if not the hardest role. It's of all the roles within the C-suite, it's the one that has the highest rate of turnover. People don't usually last more than 3 or 4 years. So why do you think that is, or what is it about that role in the C-suite for the CMO that makes it so difficult?
Well, one of the things is it does depend on the company. There are some who do last for quite a long time.
Yeah.
In the industry too. However, without a doubt, it's more dynamic of a role than the other roles. I think a lot of it has to do with, marketing used to, in the C-suite, have an interest in pricing, product design, distribution, sales.
Right.
It used to be more involved in more of these areas. And to some extent, what's happened is marketing has been balkanized into really lead development and brand communication. And, lead development, if it works, it's great, but, eventually it's not going to work because you're going to run out of whatever you're doing. So, then you got to come up with the next big thing. And brand, unfortunately, is something that, a lot of companies see as a luxury. And, so in bad times, they'll cut it, or a new CEO will come in and that CEO will say, I don't like these commercials, and so
Yeah.
it's a hard situation. There are some companies, one thing that's interesting is there's some companies now that are outsourcing more components of the CMO role.
Uh-huh.
And, so it's an interesting thing. In many respects, what's happened is all those formal duties of the traditional CMO, a lot of them have been taken over by either the CEO or the chief technology officer or somebody else. So it's definitely a difficult place to be right now, to be a top level marketer.
Yeah, I find that, it's something that we see where their CMOs are really looking for data. They're really looking for stories, so that they can bring stakeholders into like the process and understand like this is what we are actively doing and here are the actual results of this. And I think CMOs who are able to succeed in today's context are ones that are actually able to connect all the dots, right? They're able to get all the way from like somebody who saw a ad all the way through to that person actually bought something and generated this amount of revenue and like close that entire loop. So I do think that where CMOs get challenged is that a lot of times they don't have control over all the pieces they need to have control over to be able to even close that loop and tell that story. So, so being successful as a CMO today, I think is not an easy thing, to say the least.
It's very difficult. I think luck's involved. Do they go into an organization that understands marketing's role?
Yeah.
There are mature organizations though that have very successful marketing functions out there as well. But one of the things I contend is a lot of people think that marketing is like magic, and that if you hire the right person in there, they can wave the wand. And a lot of people are shocked that it actually requires budget and money to make these things happen.
Yeah, and I also think it's like a mindset shift. Like like the other people within the C-suite need to shift gears into more of a, almost like taking it as science. Like we have to run tests. We have to see the results of those tests. Based on the results of those tests, we'll tweak our formula and we'll run some more tests versus like, make some magic happen here. And if it doesn't work, you're fired. It's like, no, we're going to test some things. We're going to understand if it worked or not. We're going to gain some insights from that. And we're going to test more. And it's more of like this iterative mindset versus like, here's the new campaign, it's going to go bonkers. So being a CMO is tough these days.
I'm glad I'm teaching. I've been in that seat. It's a hot seat. Yeah,
for sure. So one of the things I saw on your LinkedIn profile that I thought was kind of fun is you had like a list of your Gallup strengths, right? And one of those is futuristic. So I want you to take out your crystal ball a little bit and tell us what kinds of trends or technologies you're seeing today that you think people should be paying close attention to, that in the coming years, this stuff is going to be important for all of us. Do you have any ideas or tips on trends or tech that you're seeing that is going to be relevant into the future?
Well, so to be clear, in terms of Gallup, I'm interested in the future. I'm not a futurist.
Okay.
And I'm bad at predictions, most of the time. So, with that, I'll tell you some things I'm looking at.
Yeah.
One is, Chief Martech, you familiar with them?
No.
So Chief Martech, they monitor all the cloud-based marketing platforms.
Okay.
And there are over 7,000 of them now.
Yeah.
So what that tells me is nobody knows what's going on, really.
Right.
It's so complex that there's so many choices.
Right.
And software is always a bit of a mystery. So you don't really know how all that stuff works. That means that companies that can be guides like Augurian have a real good place, because there's no way anybody inside of a company can figure all that out on their own.
Sure.
You need partners, and you need people who are good in certain areas.
Yeah.
So that's, in terms of marketing. In terms of, the broad macro environment, the things that I see is, we're having, obviously COVID, which is not going to leave us.
Yeah.
It's going to, it's spiking again. It's in June of 2020. And, they've never come up with a vaccine for an RNA virus before. So this would be a first if they can do that.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty harsh reality. There's a lot of economic realities with that. I mean, 20 million people are unemployed right now. It's just mind-boggling.
Right.
I feel so sorry for those people. It's so good to have some work to do, for one thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a big issue. We have a lot of social discord in this country. And on top of that, some futurists I've been looking at that I respect do believe that essentially on the geopolitical stage, Donald Trump is more of a symptom than a cause of our withdrawing from the geopolitical landscape. And a lot of that has to do with free trade has brought 1 billion people out of poverty in the world, but it's hurt a lot of people in the United States. And so these are all crazy complex issues.
Right.
It's geopolitics. But all of these things are in play at the same time. And so I think it would be very risky to hazard a guess as to where all of this is heading. I do have an interesting thing that yesterday I talked with a tech marketer in New York City who is involved with the investment community.
Okay.
And they're looking at putting equity stakes into companies through their investment partners, and also revenue sharing with mid-sized companies, so companies with $20 to $500 million in sales. And part of what they see is that there's going to be a lot of defaults and opportunities to buy companies that haven't integrated digitally yet, and then do that with them. I think that's pretty fascinating. This guy's a marketing background. So, I think there's going to be a lot of room for innovation in this. I mean, whenever things are really bad, there's bad things going on in certain areas, and there's great opportunities in other areas. And, I do believe that the tech space is going to be the big winner. I mean, actually, Wall Street says that. I mean, if you took away Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, the stock market would be down significantly.
Sure.
They're pulling everything up, and so obviously, back in the 80s they talked about the information age. It's definitely here. Yeah,
it sure is. So you mentioned that you listen to or read a couple of different futurists. Do you have anybody in mind? Who would you just like off the cuff recommend? Like, here's somebody that I've been paying attention to.
Well, on the geopolitical front, there's this guy named Peter Zeihan.
Okay.
I find him to be pretty interesting. In terms of economics, I like Ray Dalio. I think he's really interesting. Jeffrey Gundlach is interesting in terms of economics. I have friends who are futurists. Cecily Summers in Minneapolis. She has some really great ideas about what drives economies and what drives culture. She's working with Google on the future of leadership. She'd be a great one for you to have on here.
Okay.
And
I'll see if I can get her on.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then there's Simon Anderson is a futurist in Minneapolis. And I've gotten to know him pretty well. And, he just flat out says, I can't predict the future. All I can do is show you trends.
Yeah.
Although he says there are situations where you can line up all the trends, and he says that you'd be very foolish to ignore them.
Right.
Like, for example, that COVID would grow.
Yep. That's a given at this point.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, this has been great. I love just picking your brain and hearing your thoughts on everything from what CMOs need to be thinking about all the way to the geopolitics and back. And I really do appreciate your time. So we'll just make sure that, people need to go and buy a copy of The Physics of Brand. And when this new book comes out, we'll have to make sure we pay attention to when you get it published and have you back.
Sounds good, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Bye.